I couldn't believe I was standing here in the principal's office, in front of her desk like some kind of criminal. My hands were shaking. Just this morning I was a normal kindergarten teacher, but now, suspended. All because I hugged a crying child. Yes, you heard that right. A hug. Has compassion become a crime? Mr. Brennan, you don't understand, the principal said, her eyes fixed downward as if she couldn't bear to look at me. He's not just any child. He's Grayson Ashford's son, the CEO, a billionaire. And his staff made it very clear, no physical contact whatsoever. I stood there in silence. What could I possibly say? All I could think about was that little boy, Barry, with tears streaming down his face. He was missing his mother. He was alone. And I was just being human. I pulled him close and told him, "It's okay, buddy. You're safe." But now that word safe was destroying me. The principal pushed a suspension letter across her desk toward me. "You cannot return for the next 2 weeks." Ashford Industries filed an official complaint. My hands trembled as I picked up the letter. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking. I kept telling myself this was wrong, but no words came out. Just one broken phrase. "But, Brennan," the principal said my name like a warning shot. "You know who these people are. If they wanted to, they could shut this entire school down. So please, just cooperate." Cooperate? What did that even mean? Shut off my heart. Turn off my emotions like a switch. I'm a teacher, not a robot. That day stayed with me for hours. On the drive home, everything felt blurry. The buildings, people's voices, the traffic noise. Only one thing remained sharp in my mind. Grayson Ashford. That name. That power. The man who didn't think twice about his own son and had me suspended without hesitation. When I finally reached my apartment, the whole place felt empty and cold. I tossed my bag into the corner and collapsed onto the sofa. I made a cup of coffee that went cold because I just sat there, lost in thought. Was it really my fault? Was comforting a hurting child such a terrible crime? The night grew darker, and I remained trapped in that single spiral of thoughts. But then, at 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Who could possibly be here this late? I opened the door, and there he stood, tall, sharp jawline, black suit like he'd just walked out of a board meeting, dark eyes that held no warmth, no shame, just authority. "Grayson Ashford," he introduced himself, as if I didn't already know. My breath caught in my throat. I know who you are." "Good." He stepped inside without asking permission. "Your name is Brennan Hayes. You touched my son. Explain yourself. Why?" The audacity of this man left me speechless for a moment. He stood in the center of my small apartment like he owned it. His presence filled every corner, made the air feel heavier. I forced myself to meet his gaze, trying to find any trace of humanity in those cold, calculating eyes. "Because he was crying," I finally answered, my voice steadier than I expected. And I'm his teacher. It's my job to comfort him when he's upset." "Your job is to follow the rules," Grayson replied, his tone sharp as ice. "And you were explicitly told no physical contact." Something inside me snapped. I actually laughed. Yes, I laughed, because this whole situation had become absurd. So what should I have done? Let him cry? Leave him alone when he was missing his mother? Do you even know if your son has a heart? The silence that followed was deafening. The entire room fell quiet. I thought he might explode at me right then, but he didn't. He just stood there, staring at me as if someone had challenged him for the first time in his life. Then he spoke, his voice lower now. "Do you know that Barry's mother is dead?" My heart sank into my stomach. She's gone." My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Yes. 2 years ago. Car accident." There was no emotion in his voice, but I could sense the weight of those words, the pain buried beneath that stoic exterior. "That's why my staff has clear instructions. No unnecessary touching, no attachment, because when people get close to Barry, he gets hope, and then they leave." Something broke inside my chest. Now I understood why Grayson was so protective. This wasn't just about being strict, it was about fear. The fear of watching his son suffer through another loss. "I didn't know," I said quietly, and this time my voice carried more than just embarrassment. It carried sympathy. "You should have known." Grayson straightened his coat, his armor going back up. "But you didn't think, you reacted with your emotions. And now I have to show you the consequences." "Consequences?" Disbelief flooded through me. You already had me suspended. What more do you want? Grayson took a long breath, as if he was about to make a significant decision. Then he looked directly at me, unflinching. I want you to stay. At my house. With Barry. For 2 weeks, I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. What? My son has become attached to you. He's been asking for you at school. If I remove you completely right now, it will break him. He pulled out a paper and placed it on my coffee table. A contract. 2 weeks. You'll handle Barry. At home. Officially, your job is to teach him. Spend time with him. Unofficially, he paused. I need to determine whether you're worthy of trust. I stared at the contract, then back at him. This was all so sudden, so unexpected. On one hand, my career was on the line. On the other, there was a small child who had already formed a bond with me. And if I refuse, Grayson smiled, but that smile was cold as winter frost. Then you won't just lose your teaching position, you'll never work at any school again. I guarantee it. As he said this, he looked straight into my eyes, and I knew this wasn't a threat. It was a promise. When Grayson Ashford said something, it happened. I picked up the contract. My hands were still shaking, but this time not from fear, from uncertainty. When do I start? Tomorrow morning. A driver will pick you up at 8. Grayson turned toward the door, but before leaving, he looked back at me. And Brennan, Barry is very fragile. If you hurt him, the consequences will be far worse than any contract. He left. The door closed, and I stood there alone, holding a contract in my hands and 100 questions in my heart. The only thought running through my mind was, is this man insane? He stood in the middle of my tiny apartment like it was his personal property. Suit perfectly pressed. Expression frozen. But his presence, God, it was so overwhelming that even the air in the room felt suffocated. How did you even get here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Finding an address isn't difficult, he replied bluntly, without a trace of guilt. Then he looked at me, that gaze held neither love nor hate. Just analysis, like he was judging me, measuring my worth. You ignored my question. I asked, why did you touch Barry? My fists clenched. Because he was crying. And I'm his teacher. My responsibility is to comfort him. Your responsibility is to follow rules, Grayson said in that cold tone. And you were clearly instructed, no physical contact. I laughed. Yes, I actually laughed, because this was becoming ridiculous. So what should I do? Let him cry alone? Abandon him when he's missing his mother? Do you even care if your son has feelings? Silence, complete and utter silence filled the room. I thought he might lash out at me right then. But no. He just stood there watching me as if no one had ever dared to challenge him before. Then he said, do you know Barry's mother is dead? My heart dropped. She passed away? My voice trembled. Yes. 2 years ago. Car accident. His voice carried no emotion, but I understood. I understood what kind of pain that represented. That's why staff receives clear instructions. No unnecessary touch. No attachment. Because when people get close, Barry develops hope. And then they walk away. Something shattered inside my heart. Now I was beginning to understand why Grayson was so protective. This wasn't just strictness, it was fear. Fear of protecting his son from experiencing that pain again. I didn't know, I said softly. And this time my voice held not just shame but genuine sympathy. You should have known. Grayson adjusted his coat. But you didn't consider that. You reacted based on your emotions. And now I have to show you consequences. Consequences. Shock ran through me. You've already had me suspended. What else do you want? Grayson took a long breath, as if about to make a major decision. Then he looked at me, direct, unwavering. I want you to stay. In my home with Barry. For 2 I felt like I'd been hit by lightning. What? My son has formed an attachment to you. He's been mentioning your name at school. If I remove you completely right now, he'll be devastated. He pulled out a document and placed it on the table. A contract. 2 weeks. You'll care for Barry. At our house. Officially, your role is to teach him, spend time with him. Unofficially, he stopped. I need to assess whether you're trustworthy. I stared at the contract, then at him. This was all so sudden, so overwhelming. On one side, my career hung in the balance. On the other side there was a small child who had already connected with me emotionally. And if I say no? Grayson smiled. But that smile was ice cold. Then you won't just remain unemployed as a teacher. You'll never work at any school again. That's guaranteed. As he said this while looking directly into my eyes, I realized this wasn't a bluff. This was fact. When Grayson Ashford stated something, it became reality. I picked up the contract. My hands were still trembling, but this time not from fear, from uncertainty about what I was stepping into. When should I begin? Tomorrow morning. A driver will collect you at 8 o'clock. Grayson turned toward the door, but before leaving he looked back and added, "And Brennan, Barry is extremely vulnerable. If you cause him harm, this will become far more painful than any contract violation." He walked out. The door shut, and I remained standing there alone, clutching a contract in my hands while my heart overflowed with 100 unanswered questions. I spent that entire night unable to sleep. I kept reading the contract over and over, trying to understand what I was getting myself into. The terms were clear: live-in arrangement, full-time care of Barry, strict confidentiality clauses, but what the contract didn't explain was how I was supposed to navigate this impossible situation, being close to a child while maintaining emotional distance, all under the watchful eye of his controlling father. By morning I'd packed 2 suitcases with clothes and essentials. I had no idea what to expect at Grayson Ashford's estate, but I knew I couldn't back out now, not just because of his threats, but because somewhere deep inside I genuinely cared about Barry's well-being. At precisely 8 o'clock, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside my building. The driver, an older man with a stoic expression, simply nodded when I approached. He loaded my luggage without a word and opened the rear door for me. The drive felt eternal despite probably lasting only 30 minutes. I watched the city landscape gradually transform from modest apartments to exclusive neighborhoods, with gates and security. My anxiety grew with each passing mile. When we finally approached the Ashford estate, I couldn't help but stare in disbelief. This wasn't just a house, it was a mansion straight out of a magazine. White marble pillars framed the entrance. A magnificent fountain stood in the circular driveway. The perfectly manicured lawn stretched so far that I imagined a helicopter could easily land there. Everything screamed wealth and power. How am I supposed to fit into this world? The driver opened my door and I stepped out onto the pristine driveway. Before I could reach for my luggage, a staff member appeared and efficiently gathered my belongings. "I'll take these to your room, sir," he said in a professional tone that left no room for argument. "Thank you," I replied, but he simply nodded and walked away. No smile. No warmth. Just duty. I approached the main entrance, my heart pounding harder with each step. The massive doors opened before I could knock, and I stepped into what felt like another universe. The marble floors gleamed so perfectly I could almost see my reflection. Crystal chandeliers hung from impossibly high ceilings. Paintings that probably cost more than my entire life savings decorated the walls. I felt incredibly small. "Mr. Hayes?" a stern voice called out. An older woman with neatly tied gray hair approached me. Her posture was rigid, her expression clearly judgmental. "I'm Mrs. Helen, the head housekeeper. Your room is upstairs. Left wing, right next to Barry's room." "Thank you, Mrs. Helen," I said, attempting to sound confident despite feeling completely out of place. She gave me a tight nod before launching into instructions. "Breakfast is served at 7 sharp. Lunch at 12:30. Dinner at 7. Mr. Ashford is usually in his office, but he expects Barry's routine to remain undisturbed. You're to work with Barry from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. Understood?" "Yes. Understood," I confirmed. "Good. Your room is straight down this hall, then the second door on the left." Without another word, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. I stood alone in that grand entrance hall, taking a deep breath before heading toward the staircase. Each step felt surreal, like I was walking through someone else's life. When I reached my assigned room and pushed open the door, I was greeted by luxury I'd never experienced. A king-sized bed with pristine white linens dominated the space. An attached bathroom with marble countertops. A balcony overlooking the estate's gardens. Everything was perfect, polished, expensive. Yet despite all this luxury, the room felt empty, cold. like it was designed for sleeping, not living. I set my bag down and walked to the window. Outside, several gardeners worked on the already perfect lawn. Everything was so organized, so controlled, so precise. Just like Grayson himself. I took another deep breath. 2 weeks, Brennan. Just 2 weeks. But then, a gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Soft, hesitant. I opened the door and there stood Barry. His small hands clutched a blue stuffed bunny. His wide eyes looked up at me with a mixture of hope and disbelief, as if he couldn't quite believe I was really there. "Mr. Brennan?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart melted instantly. I crouched down to his eye level, bringing myself into his world. "Yes, buddy. I'm here." "Surprised?" He smiled, truly smiled, for the first time. "You're really staying?" "Yes. I'm here now. With you." He hugged his bunny tighter and took a small step forward. "Papa told me you're my teacher now. At home." I smiled back at him. "That's right. But before we start any lessons, what do you like to do? Games? Stories?" "Stories," he exclaimed immediately, his eyes lighting up with excitement. Then his voice grew softer, more vulnerable. "Mama used to read me stories. Every single night." Pain pierced through my chest. Barry's small face showed such hope, but underneath that hope lingered an old, deep sadness that no child should carry. "Then I'll read you stories too. Is that a deal?" He nodded enthusiastically, then reached out and took my hand. His grip was so gentle, so trusting, like he was allowing himself to believe in someone again after a long time of not daring to. In that moment, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. But then, footsteps. Heavy, confident, approaching. I turned around. Grayson stood in the doorway, his suit immaculate as always, his face an unreadable mask. But his gaze was fixed on Barry's hand, which still held mine. "Barry," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "You should go to your room now. It's almost dinner time." Barry released my hand and left without protest. But he looked back at me once, a silent question in his eyes. Later, I gave him an encouraging smile. "Later, buddy." Barry disappeared down the hallway. Only Grayson and I remained. The silence between us felt charged, electric with unspoken tension. "Remember the rules, Brennan," he said without any trace of emotion. "No unnecessary attachment. Clear?" I met his gaze directly. "And what if the attachment already exists?" Grayson stared at me for several long seconds. His jaw tightened. Then he spoke, his voice dangerously low. "Then you're making a very big mistake." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there alone, contemplating his words. Was attachment really a mistake? Or was Grayson afraid that he himself might become attached? That first evening felt strange and uncomfortable. Dinner was served in a formal dining room that could easily seat 20 people. The three of us, Grayson, Barry, and I, sat at one end of this enormous table. The silence was broken only by the clinking of silverware against fine china. I tried to make conversation with Barry, asking about his favorite foods and activities, but every word I spoke felt like it was being monitored and judged by Grayson. He sat across from me, occasionally glancing up from his plate, his expression revealing nothing. After dinner, Barry was escorted upstairs by Mrs. Helen for his bath and bedtime routine. I was left alone in the hallway, unsure of what to do with myself in this massive house. "Brennan." I turned to find Grayson standing behind me. He'd removed his suit jacket and his tie was slightly loosened. The most casual I'd seen him. "Walk with me," he said, not making it a request. We walked through the house in silence until we reached a set of glass doors leading to a back terrace. The evening air was cool, and the estate's gardens were lit by soft landscape lighting that made everything look almost magical. "Barry seems comfortable with you," Grayson finally spoke, his eyes fixed on the darkened garden ahead. "He's a good kid. Smart, creative, just lonely." "He's had to be," Grayson replied, his voice carrying a weight I hadn't heard before. "After his mother died, everything changed. I changed. I had to become harder, more protective. I couldn't let him get hurt again." I stayed quiet, sensing that Grayson was revealing something he rarely shared. "But maybe," he continued, then stopped himself, shaking his head slightly. "Maybe I became too hard, too distant." "It's not too late," I said gently. "Barry still looks at you like you're his whole world. He just needs to know you're present, that you can." Grayson turned to look at me then, Really look at me. And for the first time I saw past the cold exterior. Behind those guarded eyes was a man struggling with grief, fear, and the overwhelming responsibility of raising a son alone. 2 weeks, he said quietly. Prove to me that you understand what Barry needs. Help me understand it too. I nodded, feeling the weight of that responsibility settle onto my shoulders. I will. As we stood there in the cool evening air, I realized this arrangement was about more than just teaching a child. It was about healing. For Barry, for Grayson, and perhaps even for myself. During that first week, I realized the Ashford estate wasn't just a home. It was a test. Every day brought new rules. Every night brought new silence. And in the middle of it all was Barry, who had become my reason for getting up each morning. We sat together in the garden, surrounded by perfectly trimmed hedges and blooming roses. Barry was hunched over his drawing book, creating something with intense concentration. Maybe a dinosaur, or perhaps a dragon. He never told me clearly. He'd just show me with those sparkling eyes and ask, "Guess, Mr. Brennan." An elephant, I teased. "No way," he laughed, shaking his head vigorously. "It's a superhero dragon, with fire powers." I chuckled. These small moments were what kept me alive here, because everything else felt suffocating. The staff remained perpetually formal. Meals passed in oppressive silence. And Grayson, he stayed constantly distant. But then I noticed Grayson standing on the second-floor balcony, coffee cup in hand, watching us. Silent, motionless, like a surveillance camera recording every second. His face remained expressionless, but I knew he was observing, cataloging every interaction. "Papa never comes to play," Barry said suddenly, his gaze dropping to the grass. My chest tightened. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease his pain. But what? A lie. "Maybe he's just really busy, Barry." "He's always busy." Barry set down his crayon and wrapped his small arms around his knees, making himself even smaller. "Mama used to say Papa forgot how to smile. But I want him to smile. With me." What could I possibly say? How could I justify a man who seemed incapable of giving his son the time he desperately needed? But then understanding struck me. Perhaps Grayson was trying, in his own broken way, maintaining distance, protecting himself from more pain. Barry reached over and took my hand, looking up at me with those impossibly trusting eyes. "But you're here, and you smile. So it's okay. I'm happy." Tears pricked at my eyes. I blinked them back and gently ran my fingers through Barry's hair. "I'm happy too, buddy." He beamed and returned to his drawing, his small world momentarily complete. That evening at dinner, the same uncomfortable silence prevailed. Grayson and I sat across from each other at the enormous dining table. Barry occupied the seat between us, eating his macaroni, occasionally glancing at me with shy smiles. The only sounds were silverware clinking against fine china. "Barry seems to enjoy your company," Grayson observed without looking at me, his attention fixed on his plate. "He's a wonderful child," I replied carefully. "Intelligent, imaginative, just a bit lonely." "Yes, but also fragile." Grayson finally raised his eyes to meet mine. In their depths I saw something I hadn't expected. Concern, fear, perhaps even regret. "I don't want him broken again." "I'm not here to break him, but you'll leave." He lifted his water glass and took a measured sip. "And then what happens?" I fell silent because the truth cut deep. I was temporary. 2 weeks. A contract with an expiration date. Then Barry would be alone again. And so would I. But my heart had already become entangled with this child. And maybe with Grayson too. Dinner concluded. Barry was taken upstairs for his evening routine and I headed toward my room. But as I passed Grayson in the hallway, he called my name. "Brennan." I stopped and turned around. "Barry has developed strong feelings for you," Grayson said, and this time his voice carried a softness I hadn't heard before. A hint of honesty. "You might not see it, but he looks at you like you're his hero." My heart skipped. "Grayson, I'm not a hero, Brennan," he interrupted, his eyes locked on mine. For the first time I could see vulnerability there, raw and unguarded. "I'm just a father who doesn't know how to care for his son properly. His mother left us, and I became so terrified of losing him that I pushed him away instead." My hand moved forward instinctively. "Grayson, you're not losing him. Just Let him feel that you care, that you're present. Grayson studied me intently, his gaze penetrating. Then he said quietly, "Perhaps you're right." He stood only one step away from me. Just one single step. But in that space existed everything. Unspoken words, unresolved emotions, possibilities neither of us dared acknowledge. "Good night, Brennan," he said, then walked toward his room. I remained standing there, something strange and electric coursing through me. Change was happening, slowly, silently, and I had no idea where this transformation would lead us. The next few days fell into a comfortable rhythm. I spent mornings teaching Barry basic lessons, reading simple mathematics, science experiments that made his eyes light up with wonder. Afternoons were reserved for creative activities. He'd paint, build elaborate structures with blocks, or insist we act out stories where he was always the brave knight saving kingdoms. But I noticed something else too. Grayson had started appearing more often. Not overtly, never directly joining us, but present nonetheless. He'd linger in doorways, pause in hallways, find excuses to check on things that brought him near wherever Barry and I were spending time. One afternoon, while Barry was napping, I found myself in the estate's impressive library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with leather-bound books surrounded a cozy reading area, with plush armchairs and a stone fireplace. I was browsing the collection when Grayson entered. "Finding anything interesting?" he asked, surprising me with his casual tone. "Your collection is remarkable," I admitted. "First editions, rare manuscripts. You're either a serious collector or you inherited excellent taste." "A bit of both," he said, moving closer to examine the shelf I'd been exploring. "My wife loved books. She spent hours here. After the accident, I couldn't bring myself to change anything." This was the most he'd ever spoken about his late wife. I treaded carefully. "She had beautiful taste. She had a beautiful soul," Grayson replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Barry has her kindness, her capacity for joy despite pain. I fear he didn't inherit much from me except stubbornness." "He inherited your strength," I said firmly. "Your determination, your ability to keep going even when everything falls apart." Grayson looked at me then, really looked at me, and something shifted in the air between us. "You see things others don't, Brennan. You see past the walls people build." "Maybe because I recognize them," I admitted. "I've built plenty of my own." We stood in that library, surrounded by thousands of stories, and created a new moment between us. One of mutual understanding, of seeing each other without pretense or defense. "Thank you," Grayson said softly, "for being patient with me. With us, there's nowhere else I'd rather be," I answered honestly. And as sunlight streamed through the library windows, casting golden patterns across the hardwood floors, I realized something profound. I wasn't just fulfilling a contract anymore. I was becoming part of something real. Something that felt dangerously close to belonging. The following days continued peacefully. Teaching Barry, playing in the garden, reading stories before bed. But then one night, everything shifted. At 2 a.m, a sound pulled me from sleep. Crying, soft but desperate, the kind of sobbing that comes from deep within a breaking heart. I immediately got up and left my room. Barry's door was right next to mine. I entered to find him sitting up in bed, clutching his stuffed bunny, tears streaming down his flushed face. His eyes were swollen, his small body shaking with each ragged breath. "Barry? What happened, buddy?" I rushed to his bedside and sat down carefully. "Mama," he choked out between sobs. "I saw Mama, in my dream. She was calling me. But I couldn't reach her. She kept getting further away." My heart shattered. I gathered Barry into my arms and held him close, one hand gently stroking his hair. "Shh. It's all right. I'm here. You're safe now." "I miss her so much." Barry clutched my shirt desperately, pressing his face against my chest. "Why did she leave me, Mr. Brennan? Was I not good enough? Did I do something on?" Tears filled my own eyes. I couldn't hold them back. "No, Barry. You didn't do anything wrong. Never. Your mama loved you more than anything in this world. And she's still with you. Always." I placed my hand over his heart. "Right here. She never really left." Barry pulled back slightly to look at me, his innocent eyes searching mine for truth, for comfort, for something to hold on to. "Promise?" "I promise," I said, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. Barry gradually calmed down, his breathing evening out. I continued holding him, rubbing slow circles on his back, humming a soft melody I barely remembered from my own childhood. He eventually drifted back to sleep. But I stayed. I couldn't leave him alone, not after seeing him so broken. Then, a presence in the doorway. I looked up. Grayson stood there wearing a dark robe, his hair disheveled, his face etched with tension. But in his eyes, there was no surprise. Only gratitude. And pain. So much pain. "You've been here all night?" he whispered, careful not to wake Barry. "Yes," I whispered back. I couldn't leave him alone. Grayson watched me for several long moments, then looked at his sleeping son. He moved quietly into the room and sat on the opposite side of Barry's bed. This was the first time I'd seen him like this. Vulnerable, uncertain, almost afraid to touch his own child. He reached out and gently brushed Barry's forehead. Softly, tenderly, like he was touching something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. "Has anyone ever told you, you're remarkably kind?" Grayson asked quietly, his eyes meeting mine across Barry's sleeping form. I was taken aback. "A compliment? From him? I'm just doing what feels right." "No." Grayson shook his head slowly. "You're giving him love. Real, unconditional love. And that's something money can never buy." The silence that followed felt different. Comfortable. For the first time, we sat together without barriers, without formality, without the roles we'd been playing. "I know you think I'm a terrible father," Grayson continued, his voice barely audible, his gaze fixed on Barry's peaceful face. "And maybe you're right to think so. But I was so terrified of losing him, I pushed him away instead. When his mother died, I fell apart, Brennan, completely shattered. I didn't want Barry to see me like that. So I locked everything away, every emotion, every feeling. But in doing so, I think I locked him out too." This was the first time I'd seen Grayson truly vulnerable, genuinely real. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, years of suppressed grief finally surfacing. "You're not losing him, Grayson," I said gently. "You just need to let him know you're here, that you care, that you love him." Grayson looked at me then, and tears actually spilled down his cheeks. "I don't know how anymore, I've forgotten how to show it." "Then learn again." I offered him a small, encouraging smile. "Learn from Barry. From moments like these. From anyone who can help you remember." Grayson said nothing for a long moment. He just looked at his son, then carefully took Barry's small hand in his much larger one. He held it like it was the most precious thing in the universe. "I'm sorry, son," he whispered so softly I almost didn't hear. "I'm so sorry." Barry was asleep, but somehow, a tiny smile appeared on his face. Like some part of him heard and understood. We stayed there together in that quiet room. Two broken men trying to heal, connected by the sleeping child between us. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of shared pain, of tentative hope. As dawn began breaking, painting the sky with soft purples and pinks, Grayson did something I never expected. He canceled all his meetings for the day. For the first time since I'd arrived, he stayed home. He joined us for breakfast, actually sitting down and engaging with Barry instead of just appearing briefly before disappearing to his office. They talked about Barry's drawings, his favorite stories, what he wanted to learn. Grayson even laughed. A genuine warm sound I'd never heard from him before. "Papa, will you stay home today?" Barry asked hopefully, his eyes wide with anticipation. Grayson looked at his son, then at me, then back at Barry. "Yes. Today I'm all yours." The joy that exploded across Barry's face was indescribable. He launched himself at Grayson, wrapping his small arms around his father's neck in a tight, desperate embrace. Like he'd been waiting for this moment for years. And Grayson hugged him back. Really hugged him. His arms enclosed his son completely, holding him close, and tears streamed down his face as he finally allowed himself to feel again. I watched from the doorway, my own tears falling freely. This was what I'd hoped for. This connection. This healing. This moment of a father and son finding each other again. Grayson's eyes found mine over Barry's shoulder. He mouthed two words, "Thank you." I smiled and nodded, my heart so full it ached. Because we weren't just three separate people anymore. We were becoming something more. Something that felt surprisingly like a family. 2 weeks were almost over. The contract was nearing its expiration date. But now Now this felt like so much more than any contract could define. I sat at the dining table staring into my coffee cup without really seeing it. Grayson sat across from me, but today he wasn't checking his phone or reviewing documents. He was just looking at me. Barry was at his morning lessons with a tutor who came for specialized subjects. "What are you thinking about?" Grayson asked. Whether I'm ready to stay here. Really stay." Grayson leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table. "And what is your heart telling you?" I laughed nervously. "My heart? It decided to stay the very first day." Grayson smiled. A real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Then what's holding you back?" "Because," I said, setting down my cup and meeting his gaze directly, "I know this might just be convenient for you. You're solving a problem. But I want to stay for something real. For someone who actually wants me here. Not just needs me." Grayson stood abruptly and came around the table. He moved close, very close, so close I could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from him, sense the intensity of his presence. "Brennan," he said, his voice low and earnest, "if you think this is just convenience, you're completely wrong." He took my hand in his, and the contact sent electricity through my entire body. I haven't let anyone get close in years. Because I was terrified of losing again, of breaking again. But then you came, for Barry. And without realizing it, you came for me too. My heart was racing. "Grayson, I want to tell you something," he continued, his eyes locked on mine with unwavering intensity. "I want you to stay. With us. With me. Because I've realized, you're not just what Barry needs. You're what I need too. You're the reason I'm learning to live again. To feel again." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "But you had me suspended," I said, trying for levity even as my voice cracked with emotion. Grayson smiled softly. "The biggest mistake I ever made. One I want to correct now. If you'll give me another chance." So many emotions flooded through me. Fear, hope, and yes, love. Because somewhere along this journey, I'd fallen in love with Grayson Ashford. "I'll stay," I said, smiling through my tears. "But only on one condition." "What's that?" Grayson asked. "That you open yourself up. For Barry. For me. For yourself." Grayson looked at me for a long moment, then pulled me into an embrace. Tight. Warm. Real. Desperate in the best way possible. "Thank you," he whispered against my ear. "Thank you for coming into our lives. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for showing me it's possible to love again." I melted into his arms, feeling safe. Feeling home. Finally, when Barry returned from his lessons and found us together, his face lit up with pure joy. He ran to us and threw his arms around both of us. "Are you staying forever, Mr. Brennan?" I ran my fingers through his hair and looked at Grayson, who was smiling wider than I'd ever seen. "Yes, buddy. I'm staying forever." And in that perfect moment, the three of us held each other close. A family. Finally complete. That evening, after Barry had gone to bed exhausted from excitement and happiness, Grayson and I stood together on the balcony. Stars scattered across the night sky above us. The air carried the sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine from the garden below. "You know," Grayson said, taking my hand and intertwining our fingers, "I never thought I'd be capable of feeling this way again. After losing her, I convinced myself that part of me died too." I looked at him, seeing not the intimidating CEO but the man beneath, scarred, healing, hopeful. And now I know I was wrong. He turned to face me fully, his other hand coming up to cup my cheek. "I love you, Brennan. More than I thought possible." My breath caught. Hearing those words, feeling the truth of them radiating from him, made everything real in a way nothing else could. "I love you too, Grayson. So much." He leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted. But I didn't want to. I wanted this. Wanted him. Wanted us. When his lips met mine, it felt like everything in the universe aligned perfectly. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people learning each other. Then it deepened, became more urgent, expressing everything words couldn't quite capture. Promise, hope, passion, commitment, future. When we finally separated, both of us were smiling, foreheads pressed together, breathing each other's air. "Welcome home, Brennan," Grayson whispered. And standing there in his arms, with Barry sleeping peacefully inside and stars witnessing our moment above, I finally understood what home truly meant. It wasn't a place. It wasn't walls or rooms or expensive furnishings. Home was this feeling, this connection, this love. Barry, Grayson, this family we'd built from broken pieces. This was mine. This was ours. This was everything. The suspension that had seemed like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of my real life. Sometimes the worst moments lead us to exactly where we're meant to be. Sometimes getting lost is the only way to find home. As Grayson held me close under the starlight, I silently thanked whatever force in the universe had brought me here. To this man, to this child, to this family. I'd been suspended for hugging a crying child. His father hadn't cared then, but now that same father was holding me like I was the most precious thing in his world. Now that same father was teaching himself to love again, to live again, to be present again. And that little boy who'd been crying? He was sleeping peacefully now, dreaming happy dreams, knowing he was loved by two people who would never let him feel alone again. We'd all been broken in different ways, but together we were healing. Together we were whole. Together we were home, forever.